Hello, this is a Citroen BX16 valve known on YouTube as Professor Tomato. One day I'm not going to have to say that anymore. This car's been with me for a very long time and we're trying to give it back to the owner, who is JM on Cars. He would quite like it back and I'd quite like to give it back to him. But this car doesn't want to leave. It just keeps throwing new problems, one after the other, and today I fixed one of them. I say I've fixed one of them, I haven't actually fixed it yet. I've waited and I'm going to fix it together with you to show you what I found, because this is new to me. This is a new thing. I didn't know this could happen. I mean, in theory, yes, it can happen. Well, it has happened, so it blatantly can happen, but I've never seen it before. So I thought I would show you what I found. You might remember if you've watched the dyno videos, and if you haven't, why? Go back, watch the dyno video. This car went on the rolling road. It is on the leaderboard on the wall over there. It did rather well. It did pretty good. It actually produced slightly more horsepower than it's supposed to. But during that run, I had a bit of an issue trying to get it going again. I said that when you put the key in and turn it, it kind of flooded. And I couldn't figure out why it was flooding. At the time I thought, oh, it could be injectors or something like that. But what's the odds of all 4 injectors leaking? The problem that it had got a lot worse. After the dyno run, the car was parked up for a bit over Christmas. Then recently I've gone to go back to it, get it running again, get it out on the road, and it drove like shite. It was horrendous, and this car has been many things over the, years that it's been here, but it was always driven okay. Well, when it first got here it didn't, but now it drives well. The engine runs a treat. So it was quite disheartening when it stopped running a treat. In fact, no, not disheartening. Soul-crushingly enraging, that's what it was. So the symptoms of the problem were thusly. Basically, you'd run the car, you'd start the car cold, fine. It would start on the key, you don't have to touch it with the throttle, you shouldn't have to in any fuel-injected car. You start it on the key, it would burst into life and it would run. And then it would slowly start getting lumpier and lumpier, get worse and worse and worse, and then cut out. And then you'd go to restart it again, and it didn't want to. And then sometimes if you floored the throttle right down when you cranked it, basically allowing a lot more air to come in, it would slowly cough back into life and kick a load of smoke out the back. Symptoms of overfueling, massive overfueling. So what could cause it to overfuel? Well, it's actually quite a simple system. It's a fuel-injected petrol engine. There are only 2 primary inputs on this car. There's 2 things, 2 components that if you remove, it won't run. Everything else, it will. So all the suggestions of things like, oh, is the idle valve not working properly, and is it closing randomly, but the car's carrying on fueling and things, it's none of that. The only 2 primary inputs on the car that will prevent it from running are the crank sensor, which counts the revolutions on the bottom of the engine, and the airflow meter. That's it. Take those 2 out, it won't run. Any of the other stuff, it will still run. It might not run properly, but it will run. So this was running, but not running well. So we're looking for something that would cause it to overfuel, something that would cause it to run way too rich. So under the bonnet, what you've got is a fuel system. You've got your fuel pipe coming in from the fuel pump. That's pressurized. It goes into a fuel rail, and on the end of the fuel rail are 4 fuel injectors. Those are, well, the amount of fuel they can deliver is governed by the ECU. The ECU can only decide how long they open for. That's it. Well, and how regularly that happens. Obviously, the faster the engine's going, the more regularly they open. But it can't dictate how much pressure they can allow through. They can't vary how much they open. It's just the timing. So you've got a fixed amount behind the injectors, and the amount of timing on the injectors, the amount of duration they have, is governed by things like the airflow meter. The ECU decides how long to open it for based on how much air is coming into the engine and how fast the engine's running. This car doesn't have a catalytic converter. It doesn't have lambda sensors. It has nothing. It's amazing that it actually works as well as it does, because the engine has no way of confirming that it's done right. It basically guesses everything based off the airflow meter, and that's it. So if it doesn't get it right, well, it gets it wrong and it doesn't run. Now, the problem I've had is trying to find out the things that could cause this. I have actually changed. I went through originally and got the multimeter out, diagnostics, and I went through everything. And I did find the throttle position sensor, which is basically a switch to say it's idle, had more resistance across it than it should do. Now, One of the symptoms I had was that when you accelerate, it was very jerky. When you first put a bit of load on the throttle, it would jerk forward, and throttle position sensors can do that. Throttle potentiometers can do that. These ones shouldn't do in theory, but the resistance was too high. It's probably corroded inside. In fact, it is here. There it is. And it's probably corroded inside, but basically all it is, you can hear it. That's the idle switch bit. So it's basically got two positions. That's all it is. But if the position for the idle is wrong, what the car idle mode and no throttle mode, if you like, very different. So it will run badly if that is not adjusted right or it's faulty. Bearing in mind that they're not that expensive. Well, James elected to buy one and have it sent over. It was worth doing because the resistance on that one is iffy and that is going to cause a breakdown at some point, so it's not the end of the world. But it didn't cure the problem, so what could the problem be? Well, to be honest with you, I was struggling. I changed the ECU because the ECU could definitely, it could be jamming and telling the injectors just to stay permanently open. I changed the airflow meter because it could be sending bum information to the ECU, although I did check the airflow meter with a multimeter as well. God, there's a lot of meters in that. But I checked that and all the resistances check out on that, so it wasn't really making a lot of sense. So I'll show you what I did, and in doing so I can demonstrate the problem with the car. At the moment the car is as it was, and I'm going to assume, this is my prediction, is that it will start on the key because it's stone cold. Once again, Professor Tomato has made me look a knob. Let's see if I can get it going, wide open throttle. Does that sound massively flooded? So it's actually misfiring full stop now. As you can see, it runs, but it runs like crap. Very lumpy, lots of spluttering, lots of smoke, and a bitch to get it going. Now, what will happen, I'm not going to run it much longer because I don't want to damage things. What will happen is the car will run and then it will kind of like cough and splutter and come back, and then cough and splutter and come back, and eventually it will cough and splutter and die. So that's no good. What I did while it was doing this is I was checking various components and things, and I checked this. This is the vacuum hose to the back of the fuel pressure regulator, which is here. Now, I did consider, had the fuel pressure regulator failed, but I was getting a lot of fuel coming back through the return hose, so I thought, well, it's unlikely to be that. But, unless you measure it with a gauge, you can't tell exactly what it is. I'll explain what that is in a second, but I put my finger on this and squeezed it, because what this is a vacuum line. It connects to the inlet manifold down here, and it's under vacuum. So I figured if I squeezed it, and it pulled itself together, basically, with a vacuum, and just held it, if it makes any difference at all, it's a clue. Because in theory, it shouldn't make a difference doing that. Not really. Well, not a noticeable difference. But it did make a difference. It made quite a big difference. So if I run it again and squeeze it, it's slowly coming back. And now it's running quite happily. And I let go of it, and it dies. And the reason it's doing this is very simple. Because if I take that off, There's petrol coming out of the vacuum line. It's not meant to do that. I've never seen that happen. I've seen regulators fail. And then they return either too much or not enough fuel back to the tank. But I've never seen that happen. Everything with car mechanics is about experience. You can have someone who's been a mechanic for 40, 50 years be completely caught out by something seemingly simple. And then there could be someone else around the world who's had that so many times they could have diagnosed it in 3 minutes. But that is not something I've ever had before. And I deal with these fuel pressure regulators a lot because the TVR V8s have them. Not the same one, but similar. To explain why it's a problem, I'll explain broad terms how it works, how the system works. You've got a pump at the back, you've got the fuel tank at the back, there's a fuel pump, the fuel pump sucks fuel out the tank and sends it forward here to the fuel rail, which is the metal bar across the engine with the fuel injectors on it. Now that rail there has a return on it and it goes back to the tank. So you think, well, hang on, all that's going to happen is it's going to come round and go back to the tank. It's going to follow the path of least resistance, and going through 4 little thin injector nozzles, that's more resistive than going back to the tank. So what you have is a valve on the end. You have a fuel pressure regulator, and that basically stays closed, which means that the fuel tries to come into the rail, tries to go back to the tank, can't because it's blocked, and it tries to inflate like a balloon. It gets up to 3 bar in this case, and when it gets to 3 bar, the fuel pressure regulator opens a little bit and allows the excess past 3 bar to go back to the tank. That is the static fuel pressure. That's how it works. The point is it's supposed to keep this rail here at 3 bar all the time. So when the engine is ticking over, most of the fuel is going to go back to the tank because the engine isn't using it. But when the engine is flat out, when you are hammering down the motorway in one of these cars, or any fuel injected car, you're using the most amount of fuel you can. Therefore, there'll be less fuel going back to the tank, because most of it's being used by the engine, or much more of it's being used by the engine. So the fuel pressure regulator is the little valve that sits on the back of the fuel rail and dictates how much fuel stays in that rail, and therefore the pressure that stays in that rail. If the pressure is too high, remembering that the injectors, all the ECU can do is control how long the injector's open for. If the pressure's too high and your injector opens for 5 milliseconds, it won't be 5 milliseconds, it'll be less, but say it did 5 milliseconds, the higher pressure is going to have more fuel go through it. The pressure has to be set so that the injectors can open and close for the right amount of time to get the right amount of fuel. That's it. Now, a more modern car, it gets a bit more complex. They have sequential injection. They have injectors that only fire when it's their turn. This one, batch firing. All 4 injectors always fire, whether it's their turn or not. So it does waste a little bit of fuel, but the point is that the engine spins so fast and the injectors open so, rapidly that it hangs around in the inlet manifold, and when the valve opens, it just takes it all in. It's tuned to do that. It's not tuned to deliver exactly 1 cylinder's worth per cycle, because the inlet manifold is going to be full of it anyway. Going back to the problem on this then, so that's the problem. We know the regulator has to allow the rail to pressurise at 3 bar. What you also have, though, is a thing called effective fuel pressure, which is quite simple, really. What you've got is, if you think about it, when the engine is ticking over, when it's on idle, each cylinder is drawing more vacuum than when it's at wide open throttle. When it's drawing a vacuum, it's almost trying to pull fuel through. It's pulling on the injector a little bit more, not perhaps as much in an indirect injection engine like this, but it is to a point. There is still a lot of vacuum, and the injector is trying to have the fuel pulled out of it. That means that your effective fuel pressure, the amount of fuel that's actually being put through, is probably more than 3 bar. It's not actually more than 3 bar because it's fixed, but the relative pressure is more than 3 bar, and that's no good. And likewise, when you're at wide open throttle, even on a turbocharged car and a boosted car, you can have positive pressure in the cylinders, and that's fighting the fuel from coming out. So the fuel can't get out. So you end up with less fuel pressure than you need, which is bad on any car, let alone a turbocharged one. So what you have is a balance. This little hose here, the one that's leaking fuel, is not supposed to have fuel in it at all. That is effectively at the moment acting as a 5th injector on this car, and quite a big one, and an unregulated one. What this is a vacuum line. Now that vacuum line connects to the inlet manifold and basically it balances the fuel pressure regulator. It doesn't actually control the pressure of the regulator, but it balances it. If the manifold here is under vacuum when it's at tick over, the vacuum pulls on this hose and tells the regulator, okay, maybe just let a little bit more back to the tank, effectively dropping down a little bit. And when it's at wide open throttle, it's the other way around. There's less vacuum pulling on the regulator. It might allow a little bit more through. Basically, it's like a control valve. It's like a balance. And I think what's happened with our dear friend here is there's a diaphragm inside the fuel pressure regulator that's failed, and petrol is coming down this hose, which isn't just slightly overfueling it, it's massively overfueling it, because basically all the hard work that the regulator is doing is for nothing, because, well, there's extra fuel coming through here. All the hard work the airflow meter is doing is for nothing. All the hard work everything here is doing is for nothing, because we've got an unmetered supply of fuel going into the inlet manifold, which is why it runs like death. So I've tried changing everything. I've tried changing an airflow meter, even though the resistances were fine on the other one. And I tried changing the ECU. Neither of these worked, because it was that. That's the fuel pressure regulator. Now this one is one from my stash. This is my personal stash, and I'm going to donate it. I'm donating it to this car because I want to give this car a chance. I do not want to fall out with the car anymore. I want to give it a chance. It's supposed to be going soon. It's supposed to be being tested, and I suppose I always said if it's going to fail before it goes back to the owner, fail with me, because then I can do something about it. And it has. So it didn't really manage many miles, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the regulator. Now it's quite an easy thing to change. I'm going to remove the fuel rail. Well, I'm not going to film it all because it'd be boring, but I'm going to remove the fuel rail, change the regulator over, and then we'll run it again and see what happens. Right, so regulator's in. Got some fun and games because the bolt on the end here in the inlet manifold pulled the thread out. I thought it came undone a little bit too easily. But what I've decided to do before I go trying to start it up is to change the plugs, because these were new. And, well, then they were cleaned and then they were new again. See where this is going. And they were ran, and then it ran, and they were dirty, then they were cleaned again. And they were cleaned before I tried starting it just now. You saw how long that ran for, didn't you? Now, it's actually got, technically, the wrong plugs in it. Those are for a GTI 8 valve. And I hadn't actually noticed until we started playing around with all this. So, because I hadn't changed the plugs, because jacket number 27 had already done it. But it turns out, it's a good job we did. Well, it wouldn't make a huge difference, to be fair. But yeah, it's useful that we found out, put it that way. So I'm going to pop some new plugs in it first. Oh wow, yeah, that one's still wet. Nice. So yeah, we're going to pop some new plugs in and we'll see how it goes. I guess the question on everyone's lips, and when I say everyone, I'm grossly overusing the word everyone there. The people that have watched the video and cared enough to pose the question. And that is, would this have affected the power run? You know, the dyno result. Now, the simple answer is yes. But if you think about it, the actual answer is probably not as much as you think. Because this is doing less at full throttle. At full throttle, the injectors are using most of the fuel. Not as much of it's going back to the tank. And this line here isn't under vacuum as much, because the throttle's wide open. So the cylinders are pulling fuel through, but there's not as much vacuum in here because the throttle butterfly is wide open. So the reality is it wouldn't have been sucking as much through here And if the diaphragm's failed in there and it leaks when there's a vacuum pulled on it, well, there wouldn't have been as much vacuum. So the peak power figure, as much as I'd love to say it's, well, it's not right, it's likely to be wrong because it beat my own car. Probably didn't make much difference. What it will have affected is the fuel economy massively, and the low rev drivability, the sort of flexibility in traffic, and smoothness, and starting, and general running. So that's what will have been affected. But yeah, the power figure, no, it probably is still the best one so far. There you go. How's that for some misplaced confidence? I've even put the plug cover back on before I've started it. So if my theories are correct, it should just start instantly. Well, not instantly because the fuel rail's not pressurised, but on the first crank. She lives. That's running a lot better. I need to set the fueling up on it again because I've been trying to adjust it leading up to this. So all the previous weeks I've been tweaking the fueling, and it was for nothing because it was injecting God knows how many more gallons per hour than it needed to. So I've got to do that again, but otherwise that seems fixed. Oh wow, this is really smooth. Yeah, she's very happy now. That feels lovely. Right, well, some time has passed and she is running like a sewing machine. How clean is this? That would pass a cat test, genuinely. The fun bit is that it's developed a new problem, because that's what this car does. If I come round to, let me flip the camera. We've got a misfire and now it's electrical. Rev counter's going skits as well. We've got all sorts of problems there. So we've got another electrical connector somewhere playing up. Yay. I think I've found it. It's this bolt. So, you know, I said the thread had stripped out of that. It is knackered. Look, that earth terminal. I reckon that's it. That would be enough to screw the ECU signal. So I can't be sure, but I don't know what we're going to do with that. We're going to have to bloody drill it and helicoil it or something, which means the fuel rail's got to come off again. Yay! Oh, the never-ending sagas of the tomato. So anyway, yeah, trying to make it end on a positive note. I mean, well, it is a positive note. It's fixed the problem. It's running very smoothly. Got it running very clean. I almost want them to put it in a cat test next time it has an MOT, just because it would pass. But yeah, running nicely, starting on the button, smelling nice and clean. I wouldn't say clean, but smelling cleaner. I can't drive it now, but I'll take it for a drive tomorrow and see how it goes. I'll re-earth that wire tomorrow and then drive it and make sure it's okay. And then, yeah, we'll probably have to get it helicoiled or something like that. It doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. But that's one problem dealt with, and it's arguably a bigger problem. So, yeah, cheers for watching, and no, that's it. You can go.